There is a man on this map who had been dead for 3,500 years when the mapmaker sat down to draw him. I don't mean he's remembered here. I don't mean there's a monument or a small note about something that happened long ago. I mean he is drawn as a living king, seated under a tent, a sword laid across his knees, an army at his command, on a map made in the year 1516. And the name printed above his head is one you already know, one you've known since you were a child. The name is Noi, Noah. We've spent a lot of time in Tartary, you and I. We've watched a country the size of a continent get erased from the middle of the map, renamed, carved up, quietly written out of the story we were handed in school. So you already know the ground we're standing on tonight. But this is something different. This isn't a missing empire or a border someone moved. This is a single name in the wrong place at the wrong time, and nobody has ever been able to fully explain how it got there. So let's look at it together, slowly, the way you'd look at something you weren't quite sure you'd really seen. In 1516, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller finished one of the largest and strangest world maps of the entire age. He called it the Carta Marina, and this was no amateur working from sailors' rumours. A few years earlier, it had been Waldseemüller's own hand that gave the New World the name it still carries today, America. That was him. But the Carta Marina wasn't like his other work. Most maps of the time left the land bare, a coastline, a river, a mountain, and a great deal of empty space. Waldseemüller filled his with words, long paragraphs of them tucked into the continents, describing who lived in each place and what the old stories said had happened there. Scholars today call these the Long Legends, and for nearly 400 years, almost no one bothered to read them. They've only recently been transcribed and translated in full. And on the sheet that covers the heart of Asia, the region his own map labels Tartaria, the wide country between the Black Sea and the Caspian, there is a small, careful illustration. A bearded king. He sits inside an open tent, the kind a war leader carried with him on campaign, its peaked roof crowned with little flags. A long sword rests across his lap. His face is worn and older, and his eyes are watchful. Around him the land climbs into rows of sharp woodcut mountains, cut through with the thin red lines of the map's grid. Beside the tent sits a block of dense, spiked Gothic script, the crabbed handwriting of Northern Europe in the 1400s, and directly above his head, in plain capital letters, Noi. The Latin beside him has been transcribed and passed hand to hand across independent history sites for years. Cleaned up, it reads something close to this: "Here rules and marches Noi, prince of the Tartars and commander over 600 armed men." Sit with that for a moment. Noi, Noah. Not tucked into a corner as a distant ancestor from the dawn of time, but seated on the throne of Tartary in command of an army, and placed there a short ride from the mountains of Ararat, the very place the book of Genesis tells us the ark came to rest when the floodwaters finally fell. And if this were only one map, one eccentric artist having a strange afternoon, we could set it gently aside. But it isn't only one map. The same king in the same tent under the same name appears again, a reworked edition in 1541, later versions after that carrying the image forward into the 1600s. Now, I'll be honest with you, because that's the only reason this channel is worth your time. Those later maps weren't separate, independent discoveries. They descended from Waldseemüller's original, copied and reprinted across generations. But that is exactly why it stays with me. This wasn't a slip of the pen that someone noticed and quietly corrected. For 100 years, mapmaker after mapmaker looked at Noah sitting in Tartary with a sword across his lap, and every single one of them decided to leave him there.
Now there is an answer to all of this, and it's a good one, worth understanding on its own terms before we go reaching for anything stranger. Map makers in the 1500s didn't think about a map the way we do. To them, a map was closer to a storybook laid down over the surface of the world. They wrote legend into the land itself. This hero was born here. That king ruled there. This is the river where the old tales say a whole people began. And running underneath it all was a tradition, a very old one, not a European tradition, a Central Asian and Islamic one. In that tradition, the Tatar and Turkic peoples believed they had descended directly from Noah himself. You can trace it in the genealogies written by scholars the Mongols themselves employed, men like Rashid al-Din and later Abu al-Ghazi. The line runs from Noah down to his son named Japheth, and from Japheth to a son named simply Turk, remembered in those histories as the father of every people of the steppe. The ark comes to rest. The sons scatter across the earth, and one branch rides north and east into the vast country the Europeans would one day label Tartary. So when Waldseemüller Mueller placed Noah on that throne, he may not have been confused about the date at all. He may have been faithfully recording a belief the Tartars were said to hold about themselves, that their first father came down off the mountain, settled the great rivers of the north, and that his blood simply never left. That ought to close the case, and it very nearly does, except for one word. Look again at that Latin. It doesn't only call him Noah, it calls him a commander, a lord of 600 armed men. And here is the detail that unsettles me. In the language of the Mongols, the title for exactly that kind of figure, a warlord, a lord of fighting men, was Noyan. Noyan. So which is it? Is Noi, the patriarch Noah, remembered as the founding king of the East, or is Noi a Mongol military title, Noyan, that some European scribe heard spoken aloud, only half understood, and wrote down as the one holy name it happened to sound like, a commander of warriors, mistaken forever for the man who built the ark? The maps don't tell us. That gap, that small unclosable gap between a name and a title, is the real mystery here, and no one has ever cleanly settled it. And underneath it sits a harder question still, one I'd be hiding from you if I left it out, because it's the reason this little woodcut has quietly haunted map collectors for generations. It circulates constantly on independent research sites, and it runs like this. By even the most generous reading of biblical chronology, Noah died somewhere close to 2,000 years before Christ, which means a mapmaker in 1516 drew a man who, on paper, had been gone for roughly 3,500 years. And he didn't draw him as a memory or a legend from the deep past. He drew him breathing, ruling, a crown, a tent, a sword, and 600 men at his back. So the question these researchers keep circling back to is a simple, uncomfortable one. What if the problem isn't the map? What if the calendar is? What if the distance between Noah's world and the 16th century is nothing at all as wide as we were taught to believe? I want to be careful with that one. It's a question, not a proof, and I'm setting it in front of you because it deserves to be seen, not because I can stand behind it. But it is the reason this single word has refused for 500 years to go quiet.
Let me pull one last thread before we stop. Gently. In a handful of old texts that still surface on these same independent sites, writings from the 1600s and 1700s, Tartary is described in a strange way, not as an empire at all, as the home of a lost remnant, a scattered people that a few of those old authors guessed might be the forgotten tribes of Israel, carried off into the emptiness of the steppe and never heard from again. Is there anything to it? I can't tell you for certain, but it comes from the very same instinct that put Noah on that map in the first place, the deep, stubborn sense that the origins of whole peoples had drifted east into the one region our histories later on went so oddly quiet about. So I'll leave it exactly where the maps leave it, A king in a tent, a sword across his knees, a name that has no business being there. I don't know who Noi was, I'll say that plainly. I only know that for 100 years, careful men who made careful maps kept writing his name into the middle of a country we are now assured never truly existed. Maybe it means nothing at all. Maybe it means our timeline is shorter than we think. I'm going to keep the maps open on the table, and I'm going to keep looking. If you read that Latin differently, or you've seen Noi on a map I haven't, put it down below. I read all of it,